Live and recording. Hi, everybody. It's Stratosphere Lounge Special Edition number 18, 19, something like that. The number's not relevant, frankly. I think the reason that the number's not too relevant is because we are in a different world, I think, after tonight. And before we start talking about solutions, I want to talk about the sense that I know just about everybody has out there. One of the things we're not going to do tonight is we're not going to spend any time with pessimism, and especially with recriminations. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of time for that. As a matter of fact, I think they're going to be paying me at PJTV tomorrow to go in and talk about what went wrong and what happened and so on. But I'm not going to spend one moment tonight talking about what went wrong. I'm not going to spend one moment tonight talking about how we got into that mess. I'm not going to spend a moment talking about what we could have done differently. I think it's an utter waste of time. And we don't have time to waste anymore. What I want to talk about tonight is something that I've been thinking about and really kicking, intellectually kicking the bugs out of trying to find holes in it and flaws in it and so on. And I've given this a great deal of thought. And what I'm about to talk to you about tonight is not fully formed in terms of its completeness. And the beauty of what I want to talk to you about tonight is that it doesn't have to be fully formed. The beauty of what I want to talk about tonight is that I have a general vague idea. And the entire working principle of this general vague idea is the idea of distributed intelligence, distributed talent sets, distributed skill sets, everything. So if you're here to commiserate and cry about things, this will probably help cheer you up, but I'm not here to commiserate or talk about our loss and I certainly don't need to tell any of you, I hope, at least people who've been regular listeners of mine, I hope I don't have to tell any of you that if anybody understands the stakes of what happened tonight, I must be in the upper echelon of people who has a full awareness of the nature of what happened and the kind of trouble we're in and what we have to do. But again, I'm going to put all of that behind us. So here's the case I want to make to you guys, and it's going to take me a while. The first thing I want you to do, if you're with me on this, if you're in the right headspace, is put away all thoughts of recrimination that got us to where we are. Put away all thoughts about what we could have done differently. Could we have run a more conservative? Could we have run more moderate? Put that away. Ignore the crowing that's going to be happening, because we know they're going to be crowing. And frankly, the hardest part about losing an election is hearing all these people you've been fighting publicly with yabbing in your face. I've been telling people we're going to whip them out of their boots for 2 or 3 years. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of boot comments. And you know what I'm going to do about those boot comments? I'm going to ignore them, because all of this stuff is in the past. Now, I have not only a strategy, but I also have an obligation as a person who, in this very limited sense that I find myself, is something of a public figure or maybe even a spokesperson for these ideals. So let me just explain to you what is different now that we've lost this election. Prior to losing this election, my job, as I saw it, was to convince as many people as we possibly could to turn this country around through the ballot box, because we believe that this guy was wrong, and as conservatives and as patriots, we believe in following the law. We know he was duly elected in 2008. He looks like he's been duly reelected tonight. And if you think I'm about to make a case for civil disobedience, you're wrong. In point of fact, the entire strategy, the entire plan I have is utterly dependent, and I mean utterly dependent, on following the law all the way. Because what happened tonight is we have seen, first of all, that the fundamental health of the country is about 50-50. And when I say health, I don't mean political opinions, and I'm really talking more about the dependency thing, the entitlement thing, and all of that. But even that is not the deepest level of what's wrong with half of the country. Our founding fathers made it crystal clear from the beginning. They were very religious people, and religion is not necessary to this concept, but certainly their religious principles are baked into this idea. So let's just start with the premise and lay a foundation before we get into the plan. The form of government that we love as conservatives, the form of government that we just fought 4 years against Obama trying to protect the form of government that we feel slipping away from us, the form of government, the entire idea that so many of you, and myself included, are in despair over, in tears over, sick over, worried if there's going to be a country tomorrow over. The entire premise, limited governments, all of it, the entire premise boils down to one thing and one thing only. It has to be based upon a virtuous population. That's the only requirement that this type of government has or needs. It has to be based upon a virtuous people, because the entire idea of limited government is reflected in the fact that a virtuous people, a fundamentally decent and good and hardworking people, have internal constraints on their behavior. You don't need a big government to tell a virtuous people what to do, how much to eat, how much not to eat, whether they can have a gun or not. You don't need a virtuous people to enforce gun control, because virtuous people don't go around murdering people. Virtuous people, for instance, just as a specific example, carry a handgun with them, not so they can murder people, but so they can stop people murdering people. The entire premise of limited government and rights and freedoms is based upon the idea that the people who are going to have that system of government are fundamentally virtuous people. Virtuous doesn't mean prudish necessarily. Virtuous doesn't mean religious necessarily. But virtue does mean that if you leave people alone, they will generally do the right thing, and you can define the right thing as minding their own business, working hard for their living, and not taking other things from other people coercively. A lot of this conversation tonight is going to be a bit of a two-way thing, because if you hit the upper right-hand corner where it says chat, you can get into the chat room and I can see your chat comments. And somebody said we're not a virtuous people anymore. But I don't agree with that. In fact, the entire fundamental operating basis of what I'm about to propose tonight is predicated on the idea that at least half of the country is virtuous, and half of the country being virtuous is 150 million virtuous people. And this doesn't just stop with America, by the way. This goes to people all around the world. This goes to people of virtue all around the world, because I'm talking about something very, very big in mind here. So what we have to do in the beginning, in order to lay the foundation, is we have to understand that the reason that Barack Obama is elected is not necessarily because he bought votes for people with entitlements. That's the symptom and that's the mechanism. The fact that people take entitlements and the fact that people live their entire lives without going to work dependent on those entitlements means that 50% of the population is lacking fundamental virtues as we understand the word classically. And this is in fact why we're conservatives, right? We're conservatives because we want to conserve virtue, among other things, which used to be considerably more abundant than it is today. And if you don't think that's true, by the way, just look at any kind of literature from the year 1900, or look at like read Mark Twain, even Mark Twain, who was considered a radical, a genuinely audacious man. All of his letters, because I read his letters, not just the book, he is a man of burning virtue. And all of his later anger and all of his cynicism was born of the fundamental virtue of the man who couldn't stand to see things happening that were unjust. So, the problem we have right now, and the problem that just became clear to us a few hours ago, is that we now appear to be outnumbered, slightly outnumbered, as a virtuous people. You can make the case there may have been a better banner carrier for Mitt Romney. I'm not going to get into that. It's pointless. It's behind us. I'm not going to waste time with that. What is definitely true is that half of the country understands the level of the problem that we have with the debt and is willing to make sacrifices in order to get out of that problem, which means they're not only virtuous, it also means they have a certain level of intelligence, they have a certain level of foresight, and more even than intelligence, they have an understanding and a willingness to face reality. And this is what is missing from liberals, because liberals have a very high IQ in many areas, but they simply seem to be unable to look unpleasant things in the face. And I have had the signal pleasure of talking to somebody who's listening tonight, and she will know who she is. But when you understand the full ramifications of avoiding evil, when evil comes into your home and kidnaps you and takes you away in the course of the evening, it brings it home to you that one of the problems with this culture of ours losing its virtue is its unwillingness to face evil. And the reasons half of this country now is unwilling and unable to face genuine evil is because of our own success, you see. We've become so prosperous and we've developed such a strong military sense that we've been able to keep genuine evil far enough off of our shores for so long that we take it for granted. We assume that the default state of the world is safe, prosperous, and free. And we don't know any better. And it's good that we don't know any better. It's a sign of our success. But this is the disease and the rot that has affected this culture. Because we do not have to face evil. And let me redefine evil, because now I want to get out of the value judgment of evil. There is genuine evil out there in the world. These Islamicists are evil, and the Soviets were evil, and the communists were evil. They murdered people for politics. That's evil. But it's not even this. And by the way, again, I'm checking the comments. I'm not talking about a revolution. So if anybody thinks I'm talking about a revolution, I'm talking about the exact opposite of that. So don't jump to conclusions. I got a big case to make here, and I've got to make it step by step. It's not just the fact that this population has been isolated from evil. This population has been isolated from danger. And when you become isolated from danger, you begin to develop an assumption about the world. And that assumption is that all of this stuff can keep coming. You have no sacrifice. You don't lose children in childbirth. You don't have 12 kids, 4 of whom die before they're 4 years old. You are not hardened by anything. You don't have to develop a sense of virtue to get through these tough times. Tough times for Americans today is somebody put caramel in your soy latte. I know I'm kind of struggling here, so please just bear with me as I take a walk around this large pasture that we have to cover. I've made the case before that the problem with the society that we live in is that in a growing society, in a healthy civilization, growth is exponential, so that every year that goes by, the level of the quality of life increases exponentially. Every year it gets better and better and better, faster and faster and faster. I know America did not die tonight. America's born tonight, by the way. So a growing civilization has exponential increase in the quality of living. But the problem is that curve cannot continue forever. For example, a person who's 12 or 13 or 15 years old today in America has never been cold. They've never been really hot. Most middle-aged kids. They've never been in pain. If they have been in actual pain, it's been for the length of time it takes to get them to a hospital. They've never had to suffer a broken bone or live with typhoid fever. They've never been in pain. They've never been really hungry. There's not a middle-class American who's ever been actually hungry in the way that the word used to have meaning. There are no poor Americans in the sense that the word means poor, as in Thailand. I've been to Thailand. I know what actual poor looks like. There are no poor Americans by those standards of historical poverty. And so we take all of this stuff for granted. And because we take all of it for granted, we don't develop the habits of virtue. And virtue is gone in half of this population. It's become a very selfish population, a very litigious population, and a very dependent population. And so when you ask yourself, why are we in this kind of financial trouble? We're in this kind of financial trouble because politicians, out of their selfishness and their narcissism, have given away money out of the Treasury to either buy votes in the forms of entitlements and entitlement programs, or to pay off the people that bring them votes in the terms of things like union pensions and public sector union pensions, which are providing guys who were sewer workers with a $250,000 a year annuity for the rest of their lives. They have raided the Treasury of the money that's been put in there by the producers and the virtuous people, which I define at this point as hardworking people, as people who expect reward for what they put in and don't expect anything more than what they put in. A profit is nice, but they don't expect anything for free. Ain't no such thing as a free lunch. That's a virtue in this world. So what's happened is the virtuous people have built up the richest, most successful, most secure, most militarily capable, most scientifically advanced, most technologically adept society in the history of the world. And the non-virtuous people have been raiding that pot of intellectual and financial and cultural and spiritual wealth for 50 years now. And we're out of this stuff. The bank is empty. There is no more money. There is no more fat to be given away. So the question then becomes, what do you do when on a day like today, not like today, on today, this is the day I was waiting for. It either happened or it didn't happen, but it did. What happens when a society that is based on democracy reaches the tipping point, and I define the tipping point as more people voting money out of the treasury than there are people voting to keep the money in the treasury. When the number of people who are voting themselves other people's money exceeds half of the population, you are in real trouble. And America is in that kind of trouble tonight. I thought we might have turned this around in the middle of Wisconsin and started to shallow out of this financial dive and turn it around, but we didn't. And there's nothing we can do about it, and there's no point in looking backwards, because looking backwards and arguing and recriminations is a waste of time, and we don't have a lot of time. So that's the fundamental baseline position of where we are now, as I see it. People taking entitlements. I want to be crystal clear on this. I don't have any problem at all with giving people who cannot work, people who lost their legs, or people who have cognitive abilities, or people who are blind, or whatever disadvantage there may be. That's not to say that people can't overcome these disadvantages, and they do every day. But I have no problem whatsoever with a safety net. It's the safety hammock that I have a problem with. When people think that they are entitled to not work, then you've got a problem. And this, as I said, it's going to be a very wide net tonight. I'm laying a lot of foundation down. I'll get all this stuff sorted out, and I'll put it in a logical order. Right now I'm kind of spitballing all these ideas I've had. But here's something else I think you need to think about. There is not an organism on the earth. Forget about virtue and forget about humanity. There is not an organism on the earth that will not consume all of its available food supply. There's not one. If you have a Petri dish full of like a beef broth, and you introduce bacteria to the Petri dish, those bacteria will not stop growing when they've had enough. They will continue to grow until all of the food is consumed. If you put down enough food, you get fat squirrels. You put down enough food, you get fat cats. You get fat people. You get a fat government. And so what we're fighting here, this ability of people to want to take things that they didn't earn, this ability to get something for nothing, is not just a lack of virtue. It's not even just a lack of humanity. It is a fundamental biological imperative. It is enormously powerful. And there's very few people out there, and I don't even know if I can include myself in this category. If somebody said to me, hey, Bill, did you know that there's a program that awards $50,000 a year for guys who can fly airplanes and also do internet web commercials? Certainly in my head, I would be having the discussion, well, the money's available. If I don't get it, somebody else would get it. I believe I'd turn that money down, but I wouldn't have turned it down certainly 15 years ago. I only came to this place through a great deal of philosophy and a great deal of pain. So 50% of the population has reached the point now where they are no longer virtuous enough to not take things that have been offered to them that they didn't earn, because virtue is an internal governor, right? That's the definition of virtue. So it's just not there, it's gone. And every year that goes by, with the infiltration of our education system and the unions and everything else, the numbers of virtuous people get smaller and smaller and smaller, because I love to lean forward for the big points. So here comes the first one of the night. The number of virtuous people gets smaller and smaller and smaller because virtue has to be taught to people. Our entire model of people is not that we are born perfect or virtuous. That's the Rousseauian model. That's the model that gets you the communist state. That's the model that gets you the Superman. That's the model that gets you the new man. We understand that it's the flaws in the human heart that make us human, and we understand that the perfect government is one that's designed to protect us against these flaws. So virtue is not the natural state of mankind. Virtue has to be taught to people. The primary way you teach people virtue is through religion. As religion becomes less and less a part of our society and our culture, the levels of virtue go down. Virtue can be taught without religion, but it's harder and it's rarer. And certainly if you look at what goes on in our schools today and in our culture today, especially the culture, because the culture is the way in for these people that are determined to destroy America. If you look at pop culture today, it is a wasteland of virtue. It's a wasteland of virtue. If you think about what's on television, if you think about the message that's coming through on movies, the entire idea of the anti-hero, the entire idea of the phone call at the end where you find, oh, it's a businessman, oh, it's a governor, or it's a CIA agent. the entire idea of virtue is not only just been ignored and not taught to people, it is being actively destroyed. And when you get down to the core elements of the cultural mavens, and I'm talking about the people that live in New York skyscrapers and who live just over the hill here in Hollywood, I know these people. Their entire lives are about orgies and hot tubs and doing all the cocaine they can do. The reason that the people who have influence over our culture are destroying virtue publicly is because virtue is horrifying and terrifying and threatening to them because they don't have any, and they know they don't have any. And if you've ever had the experience, which I had a few times in high school, of being the only person who won't smoke a joint, and I didn't have any particular philosophical reason not to, I just didn't want to be pushed into it. If you ever find yourself in the position where an entire room full of people are doing something that is vile or degraded or I'm not even trying to say pot smoking, or just illegal or whatever, and you don't go along, the amount of social proof and psychological pressure that will be put on you will be enormous. So you have to understand the kind of people that make the messages that we all take in through our culture. They are people who are not, I wouldn't even describe them as evil. They're simply lost. They are utterly, utterly lost. They have no philosophical, moral guidelines whatsoever. It is all about the immediate pleasure. It's about the hedonism to them. And so they are absolutely determined to destroy virtue in the culture because virtue makes them look bad, not only to themselves and their friends, it makes them feel bad because even though they don't have virtue, they still have a little shred of a conscience, you see? And whenever virtue raises its beautiful head, that little conscience of theirs starts to go off, and that is intolerable. I need another sniff of cocaine to kill that rotten voice in my head, or I need to have another 4-hour orgy in the hot tub and all this other stuff. So look, our culture is lacking in virtue because, number one, the leftists and the progressives have eliminated the teaching of virtue from our schools, but much more effectively than that, they have destroyed virtue in the culture. They made an active effort to destroy virtue in the culture. And if you look who's glorified in the culture, it's drug dealers, it's criminals, it's homosexuals. I don't have a problem with homosexuality. I don't have a single problem with homosexuality. When I say it's glorified, what I mean is the number of homosexuals in our society is probably 2 to 3%. But if you look at the number of homosexuals in show business, it's probably on HBO, it's probably 70, 80, 90%. I'm not condemning that act. I'm not even really condemning any of the acts other than to point out to you that these people are intentionally destroying the fundamental values that this country was based on. And they're not doing it in order to destroy America. I think people like the progressives like Barack Obama and Axelrod and all those Marxists, I think they are doing it to destroy America. But I think the foot soldiers in the destruction of this virtue don't. Bill Maher, for example. I don't think Bill Maher's purpose is to bring down America. I think Bill Maher's entire purpose is to live the exact kind of life he wants to without any constraints on them whatsoever, and certainly without any sense of guilt. And so Bill Maher's libertarianism and everything else is only about, it's a political philosophy, only about letting Bill Maher do whatever Bill Maher wants to do without any consequences whatsoever. Again, I'm still on the foundation, folks, haven't even got to the plan yet, right? So here's where we find ourselves. We find ourselves in a population that just a few hours ago voted for a man who has not challenged the fact that he is going to bankrupt the country. There's no challenge about that. He's spending $1 trillion more a year than we take in. He's already doubled the national debt, and he's going to add another 50% to it. Or he's added 50%. He'll have doubled it by the time he's done. $20 trillion by the time he gets out. So people voted for that. People voted for all of these things. People voted today to avoid the hard choices. Not everybody. That's the point I'm trying to make. I think I haven't seen the actual vote totals, but it's damn near 50 million, 50 million. It's almost an exact half split, right? So now we start to get to the point in terms of the plan, in terms of what we can do about it. And that's what I'm actually trying to talk about. I guess this is all my old debate experience, right? In debate, first you have to state the case, then you have to state the plan. So the case is limited government, freedom, all of the things that we admire as conservatives are in very serious trouble. We're reduced to less than half of the population now. But the good news is there's still half the country, that's 150 million people, who get it. So what are we going to do? I think that when a structure becomes too large, it becomes unsteerable. That's probably the best word I can think of. The Titanic had a few moments of seeing that iceberg out there. I don't know how many seconds it was, 20 or 30 seconds, something like that. And immediately, the second they saw the iceberg, they immediately ported the rudder over to the side and they reversed the engines, did everything they could to get out of the way. But needless to say, when you have a vessel that was, I don't know what it was, 46,000 gross tons or 80,000 gross tons, whatever it is, when you have a vessel that's got that much mass moving at that kind of speed, it can't stop it and you can't turn it around. It takes a long time. And so the government is so big that I don't think it can be steered anymore. Even simpler things than this. The school structure of the unions in the LA Unified School District is so absolutely infiltrated with unions. I'm taking LAUSD, which is the largest public school district in the country, in my understanding. LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, is so massive that it doesn't matter how much you want to change it, and it doesn't even matter if you win an election by 55%, 60%, and it doesn't matter. You can't win that election in the first place, and even if you did, it is so massive. It took 40, 50 years to destroy public education in this country. It would take at least that long to re-establish this giant ship back on a course. So what I'm talking about doing is, I'm not talking about abandoning ship, and I'm not even really talking about going galt, and I am most certainly not talking about a revolution or a departure from this country. I'm not leaving this country. Those bastards are leaving my country. I'm not leaving this country. They're getting out of my country. So the question is, how do you do it? What do you do? I've given this a great deal of thought. I think what you do is you have to construct parallel structures. You have to construct parallel structures that operate simultaneous with and adjacent to the existing structures. You have to construct parallel structures, and you have to bear an additional burden in order to do it. What that means is, let's take education by way of example. No, let's not. Let's take an example that I gave earlier on the Stratosphere Lounge, and some of you saw it and some of you didn't. Let's take something that's a little nearer to my heart. It's not as widespread, but I understand the argument a little better. Here we are in Obama's America. We've just passed $16 trillion in debt. Obama, space experts, private space people say the only thing that Obama has ever done that they liked was that he's in favor of privatizing space, because Obama doesn't give a damn about the space program. He doesn't like the American flag on the moon, and he's happy to hand it off to private space. It means it doesn't have to pay for it. So let's say that right now, on November 7th of 2012, you're one of the 150 million Americans who, or more, who thought that watching Neil Armstrong put his boot on the moon was not only the high point of American history, but the high point of human history. It was the greatest thing that's ever been done. And let's say that you're one of those people that have felt that since July 20th of 1969, this country's been in decline, and that the decline is accelerating, and that all of the things that made this country great are disappearing, and that all of this stuff is going, and that the idea of watching the Chinese land on the moon in 2025 is sickening to you. It's sickening. It's intolerable. It's intolerable. So what do? NASA, I am firmly convinced, is not only going back to the moon. I don't think NASA is going to put another man in space. I don't think NASA will ever put men in space again, ever. I think NASA is an exact example of how this thing that once was manageable sized has become enormously bigger, enormously risk averse, enormously incompetent, and enormously pointless. NASA's purpose, according to the President of the United States, is to inform Muslims of all of their big scientific achievements. So you can tell that is not going to be getting us back to the moon. So now we get down to the root of the problem, my friends. What happens if you're a patriotic American and you want the idea of Americans going back to the moon and traveling through the solar system and having a space program as one example, not the whole case, but just as one example of many things that the government used to do, like provide good schools as another example? What do? If you don't pay your taxes, men with guns are going to come and put you in jail. So the first thing we have to understand about this plan, and I don't have all this plan sketched out, but the first thing we have to understand about this plan is that this plan involves always obeying the law, always, always obeying the letter of the law, because when we stop obeying the letter of the law, the coercive power of the state and the government starts to come after us, and we will not win that fight. We found that out this evening, right? We will not win that fight. So the first thing what I'm about to propose is that we never, ever, ever break the law, and we never, ever, ever talk about breaking the law, and we never, ever, ever don't do things like pay our taxes. But what I am saying is, if you want to go back to the moon, if you want to see Americans in space as one example of the things that we could be doing in this society and that we have ceded to an incompetent and utterly corrupt government to do for us, then you could do it this way. You could set up, I have set up, a 501c3 called the Free Frontier Foundation, which is a charity, which means that any money that you donate to that charity is tax deductible. Now, if I asked you if it would be worth it to you to put $9.99 on your credit card on a recurring charge the same way as your cable bill, which is $80 a month, right? $90, $60, your internet bill. If I asked you to put $9.99, we'll call it 10, why don't we, on your card once a month, especially if it was tax deductible, but it doesn't have to be, by the way, even if you lose the tax deduction. I think you could get it, but even if you lost it, in fact, you know what? Let's just take that off the table. You pay $40, $50, $100 a month for your cable bill. I'm asking you to put $10 a month on your credit card once a month, automatically deducted, and it goes to the Free Frontier Foundation. Now, that's $10 a month per person. It's $120 a year per person. If you had 1 million Americans in on this, that's 1/300th of the population of the United States. You'd have 10 million Americans paying $1 million Americans paying $10 a month. That's $10 million a month. It's $120 million a year. That's a pretty good start. If you had 5 million Americans doing it, well, that'd be $50 million a month. That's $600 million a year. And when you start to get to numbers like 8 or 10% or 10 million Americans, which is what, 1/30th of the population? If you had 10 million Americans paying $10 a month, that's $100 million a month. That's $1.2 billion a year. And my friends, you can't build the hardware that fast. The only reason we're not back on the moon is because of the money. We have the technology. We've had the technology for 60 years now. We have the engineering skill, not as broad as it used to be, but it still exists. You could, for $9.95 a month, if you had 1 million Americans or less, you could do it. If you had 10 million Americans, you could do it in 3 years. The reason I bring this up as an example is, first of all, what is it that I would be selling you? Because unlike the government, I'm not taking your money by force. Unlike the government, something like the Free Frontier, as one example among many, is what we appreciate about a civilized life, a non-coercive life. I can't take your money at gunpoint. I have to convince you, and I have to keep convincing you, which means I have to show you enough progress so that you continue to authorize this charge, because if you think this is going nowhere, or if you think I'm siphoning off the money, then you can simply cancel the charge and it goes under. It has to operate on a profit. It has to be transparent. What it really does is it has to do what every other free business in a free country does. It has to provide you a level of service and satisfaction that is greater than your desire to not pay the $9.95. And as long as I am providing you with what you feel is worth $9.95 a month, and if I had 10 million of you, I'd have $1.2 billion a year. And I've been told by many people who understand this problem across the board that for $2 to $3 billion, 2 years worth of this adventure, we could put 50 Americans on the moon and they would never come back again, ever. And I don't mean to stop at the moon, by the way. You could build vehicles that could explore the solar system. There's no limit to it. So the question fundamentally comes down to this. The toughest thing that the government has ever done, the toughest thing in human history that has ever been accomplished, could be accomplished tomorrow if I could convince 10 million Americans, 1/30th of this country, to put $9.95 a month on their credit card for 3 years. Now, as a small example of the kind of thing I'm talking about, because I'm offering about providing a service here, and I still haven't gotten to the big picture. This is just the intermediate grounds. If I could convince you to do that, one way I would convince you to do it is, you ever want to fly in space? Well, first thing we're going to do is buy a suborbital vehicle from the people that make it. We're going to go to Scaled Composites. They're selling them to Virgin Galactic. Virgin Galactic is selling a 15-minute suborbital flight for 7 people, and it's $200,000 for your 7 minutes or 4 minutes of weightlessness. Suborbital flights, not all the way around the world. I happen to be friends with Burt Rutan. Burt Rutan likes my work. I've admired Burt Rutan all my life. Being friends with Burt Rutan is one of the single honors of my existence. Burt Rutan said that Scale Composites, his company that makes that suborbital vehicle, made a deal with Virgin Galactic who said, we'll give them as many as you want, but not exclusively. In other words, if somebody else came up with the money, which is probably $40-50 million, something like that. When I say $50 million, what I really mean is 2 weeks of income from 10 million Americans being part of this. Then I would buy a Spaceship Two, and every single week I would fly 7 members of the Free Foundation on a suborbital flight. So your $9.95 enters you into a contest, and if you win, you get to fly in space for $9.95. And when orbital flight became safe enough, after the test pilots have risked and in many cases given their lives to find out where the demons are in that technology, then you can be in orbit for $9.95 a month. And when we get the technology to go back to the moon, and when we've done enough test flights and we have a relatively high sense of safety, then you can walk on the moon for $9.95 a month as a lottery. But people buy lottery tickets, but the difference between this lottery and the other lottery is you win even if you don't win, because if you're in this lottery and you want the ride, you don't get the ride, you don't get the ride, but you still get the space program. And this doesn't seem unreasonable to me at all. I don't see anything wrong with this problem. I've talked to people, I've talked to business people, I've talked to scientists, the technology is not the problem. The problem is the money. The problem is the money. Now, here's where it gets actually kind of clever. Because, by the way, somebody just said I'd be willing to pay $50 a month for that. Well, if you paid $50 a month for that wild goose, you stalwart, this guy's a hero, he's here all the time. If you wanted to pay $50 a month, you get 5 memberships. You can hand one out to every member of your family, or you could keep them all yourselves. Now you have 5 times the chance to fly. But back to the point here. What I'm telling you is, you would have a space program, and this space program, unlike NASA, would not be a let's take baby steps space program. This space program is going to get people killed, because if we're not killing people, we're not trying hard enough. Don't misunderstand me to say that means that we're going to be trying to kill people, because the people that are going to die are going to be my friends, and I'm going to be riding on this vehicle, and maybe it's going to be me. But what I am saying is, when a society becomes so risk-averse that the National Space Program is terrified of killing people, more terrified about losing astronauts than anything, then you have lost your way. Because for every single person that I put in that chair, there'll be 5,000 applicants ready to go. And if somebody gets killed on one of those flights, there'll be 5,000 applicants ready to go. There are bigger things in this life than getting killed, my friends. That's one of the first things that a virtuous people learns, and that a society as soft as ours doesn't. There are worse things than having your life go away. And we're about to see them in our own eyes. So using this as an example, just as an example, start to get a picture for what I'm talking about. Because when I ran this past the engineers, and friends of Bert, the one thing that the guy said that was most interesting to me was, he said, you know what's beautiful about this bill? I said, what's that? He said, you're not fighting City Hall. You're just ignoring City Hall. I said, that's it. You see, that's it. The state is so powerful that we cannot fight the state, and we shouldn't want to try. It's a catastrophic, monumental mistake. This is why the whole militia thing and the survival thing, I believe, is a well-intentioned mistake. If you are going to resist the government of the United States, and the government of the United States is heading in the direction that we see it heading today, you can't resist it. The only way you can resist it, and the only way you can win, now we're getting down to the brass tacks, folks. The way you beat these people, the way you beat these swine that have taken over our country, is we have to build parallel structures, and these parallel structures have to be funded, and they have to be funded voluntarily. And what that really means is people like you have to be willing to pay for things twice. You have to be willing to pay for a National Aeronautics and Space Administration budget, which is coming out of your taxes, and you have to pay for an educational system that you won't send your kids to school, because that's coming out of your taxes too. You don't get to deduct your taxes. You don't get a voucher in the world I'm talking about. You're paying for public education, and you're paying for NASA, and you're not getting a damn thing for your money. You have to pay extra for the space program, and you have to pay extra for your education, because for the exact same membership idea that I just mentioned for the Free Frontier, you could have the American Academy. And for $9.95 a month, if you had 10 million Americans, you'd have $1.2 billion that would not be spent in Washington. They would be spent on teaching aides. They'd be spent on hiring teachers at $300,000 or $400,000 a year who are teaching through the internet with standardized tests, with rigorous standards, with no social indoctrination whatsoever. And you'd be getting Greek and Latin on your computer, and your kids would be the bomb. And this is the entire key to why everything that follows downstream from this will work. Because private businesses, private enterprises that are voluntarily funded out of free will for a desired project that you can get out of any time have to be accountable to the people who are paying the money. The free frontier has to provide enough progress for you to continue to want to put that $9.95 on the card, and the American Academy has to get your kids the kind of test scores that make you willing to pay another $10 on your card. By the way, we're up to $20 a month now. We're almost at a quarter of your cable bill. And now you've got a space program and you've got a public school system. You start to see the scale of this thing? But the only way it works is if you are willing to pay extra, because you cannot get in the way of the government. The government doesn't mind if you ignore them as long as they get their money and as long as they get to do what they get to do. But you have to be able to play by the rules, but you have to be able to get what you want out of the society. Now, what is the end result of this kind of plan? If you think about it, if you think about what I'm talking about is using the internet as an organizational and communicational means essentially only. What I'm talking about is this. It means that the producers now, the virtuous people, are spending their own money voluntarily on other virtuous producers to achieve goods and services that they want in life. And they don't have to spend a penny of that money on the consumers and on the parasites. Your tax money, you just have to write it off, folks. If you're making, let's just say you're making $100,000 a year, because I'm not real good with math. Let's say you're making $100,000 a year, and let's say that the state, when it's all said and done and they've taken all their money and let's say they take half. State taxes, local taxes, federal taxes, they've taken half. They're going to take their half. They're going to pay their public sector unions. They're going to pay more in debt. They're going to do all the things that the government does, and we've seen what they do, and they're going to take half. And you're going to have to live on the other half, and you're going to have to get the things you want on the other half. But you can, because all of this stuff I'm talking about is less than your cable bill. So if you work a little bit harder, that means the government takes even more of your piece, but you have enough money to buy your own space program, to buy your own national academy. Just to reiterate the National Academy idea, all I'm really talking about is, what is a school? Right? I mean, let's ask some fundamental questions. What is a school? According to the government, a school is a building that costs a certain number of millions of dollars, and certain millions of dollars in computer labs, and certain millions of dollars in union teachers, and so on and so on and so on. My idea of a school is a guy who knows what he's talking about sitting under an apple tree with a slate and a piece of chalk. Because I could teach people aerodynamics with a slate and a piece of chalk, and if I had somebody with half a brain for 5 hours, they would understand the fundamentals of why an airplane flies and how it's controlled. I could do that. I'm a good teacher when it comes to that kind of thing. You see? So what your $9.95 a month for an American Academy would buy it would buy the educational materials in terms of audiovisual stuff like Ken Burns' Civil War and all these other things. It would pay teachers, because you have to have teachers. It would pay for standardization, and then you would then locally take that money. It wouldn't go up top. You would just locally find a property that you would rent, and instead of having to homeschool your kids, because homeschooling, you see, is the model that got me really started thinking about all of this stuff. Homeschooling is where people are paying for a kid's education that they're not getting. They're paying for public school education. They don't get to save their money. They don't get to not send in those taxes. So they're paying for that education that those children are not getting, and then they're going to all of the extra work. It's a second full-time job, because they figured that their children's education is worth a second full-time job. It's a full-time job to teach kids. So imagine how much easier homeschooling would be if homeschooling consisted of you organizing through the website in southern Des Moines, Iowa, finding 5 other people who had a skill set. A lot of these people are retired. They're looking for things to do. These people made their entire career as engineers. They're sitting here wasted. Society's thrown them away. There's nothing they'd rather do in the world than get out there and teach children. And if you paid them, they'd be over the moon. And you use these things to find a reasonably priced property, and you're shopping around for that because it's your money, folks. The cheaper, the better the building, at the lower the price, the more money you save. You see? It's all working together. And then you get a standardized test and a standardized curriculum that is put together by people who are not left-wing ideologues, but by classicists and by people like Victor Davis Hanson and math and science and all this other stuff. And see, here's where it really starts to pay off, because your space program succeeds where the government space program doesn't succeed. and your education system succeeds, and the way you know is that your kids are getting the best test scores, they're going to the best colleges, and those sons of bitches are working for your kids for the rest of their lives. Sooner or later, other people will wonder why their children are working for your children, and then they'll have a chance to think about what kind of schools that you've set up for your children, and then they'll opt in at $9.95 a month, and then you'll have more money to spend. And as long as you're voluntarily paying this money, and as long as it's decentralized, it will probably take about 200 or 300 years for this thing to grow big enough so that it doesn't work anymore. And then we'll have to have some other guy come on the web and figure out some new way to do this sort of thing. But I'm telling you, it will work. It would work. There's no reason why it wouldn't work. And now let's get to the upper level stuff. Okay? Now we're going to get to the upper level stuff. Because the question then becomes, if all of the stuff that I've said is fundamentally true, and I don't see any reason why it isn't, then how do you actually implement this? Now you start getting into things that nobody talks about. But I'm going to talk about them. We just lost this election. We fought as hard as we knew how. I fought as hard as I knew how. I know all of you fought as hard as you knew how. I've seen the Tea Party movement. I've seen these people going to meetings. I saw it all right? So now we have to talk about how we're going to make this parallel government work. And you've got to stop thinking of it as a government. This is the message, this is the fundamental message I wanted to give to you guys, and I wanted to get it on the record this evening, the evening of Barack Obama's re-election. Because I'm not talking about really a parallel government. I'm talking about what is going to come in the age after giant government. And now I have to tell you about a couple of influences on this thinking. One of the people that was strongly influencing me on this was Scott Rasmussen. Another one was, oh my God, what's his name? The congressman we just lost up in Thad McCotter had some input on all these other things. And there's a book out called, I think it's called The Starfish and the Spider, which is about decentralized self-forming associations. Now it's going to start getting a little airy-fairy, but hang with me here, okay? Hang with me here. Rasmussen said that when he said that this election, he said this about a month ago, he said this election coming up is not the most important election of your lifetime. You think it is, but it's not. Rasmussen is the guy who saw ESPN when there were only 3 TV networks. He said people will pay to see all sports. They said, you're out of your mind. And Rasmussen said, we'll see who's out of their mind. So I thought Rasmussen was going to come and give us poll numbers and tell us how everything was going to be just hunky-dory, but he didn't. He said, no, the most important election of your life is going to come 8 years from now, long after Barack Obama's gone, because that's when all of this money and all of this debt is going to hit. And then Rasmussen started talking about the fact that public change happens prior to political change. And he told a story that I had never heard before, and it blew my mind. Rasmussen said, I still don't even know this is true. I trust Scott, so apparently it is. You all know the story about Rosa Parks, who was the black woman who got on the bus, was told to sit in the back. It was a segregated bus, colored people in the back, and she said, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to sit up front. And it started the civil rights movements. And I want to say that was, somebody help me out in the comments section, was it 1955, 60, something like that? 57, somewhere in that ballpark. Somebody's going to give me the number where Rosa Parks decided not to go to the back of the bus. But Rosa Parks not going to the back of the bus started the civil rights movement. But what Scott Rasmussen told me was, are you ready for this? Was that Rosa Parks herself, the same individual, 13 years earlier in the late 40s, said the exact same thing. I'm not getting on the back of the bus. I'm sitting up front. And no one heard boo about Rosa Parks the first time she did it because the public wasn't ready for it. The black community saw her as a troublemaker. 1955, thank you guys. The black community saw her as a troublemaker. The population still had all of these racial stereotypes and prejudices. So when she first did it, if she did it in 1955, it was 1943, I think is what Scott Rasmussen said. She said the exact same thing on the exact same bus, and no one had heard of her. And what Rasmussen said was the civil rights movement, which was a tectonic shift in American culture, happened because people's opinions changed in the 12 years between 1943 or whatever it was and 1955. The public changed, and then the politics changed, right? I believe him. I'd never thought about it before, but I think Rasmussen is exactly correct. I think he's exactly correct. That the public changes because of cultural influences or whatever, and then the government and the policy follows. Now, what Thad McCotter said was, this gigantic state that we have now, this gigantic federal government that we have now, is a very hierarchical, very vertically oriented, top-down structure. And it was built upon and grew out of the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution is the second great wave of human breakthrough, right? The first wave was the Agricultural Revolution, started back in the Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means between the rivers, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, in Iraq, in modern Iraq, back in the days of Babylon. So people started growing grain, and that revolution lasted for 7,000 years. Then came the Industrial Revolution, where you began to harness steam power and chemical power and all these other things to create things in mass production, produce so much wealth. That's the second wave. The third wave is the information wave, the information age technology. We're talking through information technology right now. Facebook, YouTube, Apple, all this stuff. Information, third wave technology, right? What McCotter said, and I think he's absolutely right, is that the federal government and the government structure that we have now grew out of the second wave, because the first wave of the American Revolution, the founding government of the United States, this is a profound thought. It's a profound thought. We started as a nation, America, the idea of America. We all know what that idea is. I don't have to explain it to you. The idea of America started as an agricultural country that was a dispersed country of virtuous people, because you had to be a virtuous person if you were growing your own food or if you were defending yourself against wolves or Indians. That's how America started. And this giant state that we've just had this thing grow in front of us and get bigger and bigger and bigger like a tumor, which was just crowned in glory a few hours ago, is the product not of the founders' vision or of the founders' entire society. Because the founders were an agricultural people. They were dispersed, virtuous people. This giant state that we have came into being in order to govern a second wave technology, in order to govern an industrial revolution country, which meant cities, which meant all of the support cities need, which meant all of things like gun control and entitlements and public transit and all this stuff. It's all part of cities. You need cities to have an industrial revolution. So this giant vertical, big, enormous, fat, slow dinosaur of a government was designed to govern a vertical, fat, rigid, top-down, immobile, second-generation industrial society. But what Thad McCotter said is, if I can reach into my pocket, and hold up one of these and order steel from China right now, if I can order steel from China right now, then that world is gone. And what McCotter said was, if the vertical economy has gone horizontal, where any single person in America can order parts from anywhere in the world. You don't have to be IBM to order parts from China now. You have to have an iPhone, and a mom and pop organization can order balloons from China by picking up the phone. When you have a horizontal, dispersed economy, you must have, and you will have, a horizontally dispersed government, because a vertical, rigid government cannot govern a horizontal, dispersed, rapidly moving, rapidly evolving economy. Right? I agree with this 100%. So what I wanted to do to you poor people out there who've suffered the brutality of watching this loss and seeing this tyrant grinning is I wanted to tell you that it is time, in my humble opinion, to stop thinking about winning elections. It's time to stop thinking about Republicans and Democrats and liberals and conservatives. It's time to stop putting energy and money and all of this stuff into the government, because the government has never been the country, ever. The country has never been the government, ever. This entire country is founded on the idea of being opposed to a government. So if Barack Obama won control of the government, that doesn't mean he won control of America. It means he won control of what is preventing us from being America. And this allows us to function as a dispersed, agriculturally a dispersed, not agriculture, but it's redispersed, horizontal, democratic group of virtuous people. Now, what do you do about the people out there who aren't virtuous? You ignore them. You ignore them. You leave them alone. Let the government take care of them. You're going to lose half of your income in taxes. Fine, it's gone. Write it off. Stop crying about it. It's gone. Pay your taxes so they don't put you in jail. We need the 50% of your productivity left to do the other things. Ignore them. Let them go on the dole. We don't care. We do care, but there's nothing we can do about it. We found that out tonight, you see? There's nothing we can do about it. And if we break the rules, they're going to come after us. So we're not going to break the rules. Ever. We're not going to break the rules. Ever. Now, the question then becomes, how does this post-government thing exist? I have some ideas on this, but the beautiful thing about this is I don't have to have all the ideas. I don't even have to have 2% of the ideas or 1% of the idea. I just have to put it out there, and you guys can come up with the ideas, and you come up with things that will never, ever occur to me. And lawyers will say this, and engineers will say, everybody will bring things in, it'll self-assemble. Trust me on this one. But here's the thing that matters. How do you get the critical mass? How do you get enough people to have enough money to do a space program, or have enough money to do the schools, or have enough money to do all these other things? Now you start getting into stuff that I have some expertise in, and that is image and salesmanship and selling ideas and branding. So about 2 years ago, I started trademarking a term, and I bought the website, and the term I trademarked is the common sense resistance. The common sense resistance. And the common sense resistance is nothing more or less than a self-selecting group of people who understand that hard work should be rewarded, that nothing is free, and that solutions are not only available, but they're obvious. And the reason that I think about this is because, having watched what I've seen, I've fought this guy for 5 years. I've fought this man for 5 years. I made my best case. And I'm not saying that we've lost the election because of me, but I am saying I understand the dynamics that's going on out there. And so there are a lot of people out there who didn't like Barack Obama very much, who voted for Barack Obama because they could never vote for a Republican, because the culture has been so effective at branding us as racists and dinosaurs. You can cry about it all you want to, and you can talk about how unfair it is all you want to. I'm tired of looking backward. I'm tired of complaining about media bias. This is the genius of this idea, you see. They don't get another gram of our energy. They don't get another penny more than what we owe them, but they especially don't get our time, and they don't get our effort. It's behind us. Is the media biased against us? 100%. What are we going to do about it? Nothing. Nothing. We're going to ignore them. We're going to argue with these people? No. They're going to shoot holes in what we're trying to do and mock it and call it stupid and fun, or they're going to take certain members who are maybe a little on the extreme of all of these things and get them on the Daily Show and laugh at them? Of course they are. What are we going to do about that? We're going to get on the Daily Show and argue our position? No, we're not. We're not going to waste another second of our time, not another second of our time with these people. And like that school, like that private academy that will eventually win converts because the parallel structure will outperform the dinosaur of the sinking ship of state, in every single place where we implement a privately based, non-coercive, voluntary additional microtax. That's the way to think about your $9.95 for the space program and for the school. It's a voluntary microtax, but you can stop paying this tax anytime you don't want to. Because you can stop paying, again, I'm not determined. I don't believe in the innate virtue of people. I believe in the profit motive. So if I'm running the space program thing, I want to deliver the goods, because if I don't, you'll stop paying me. And I want your kids to get straight A's and perfect scores on their SATs, because if they don't, you'll stop paying me. This is the genius of the whole thing, you see. It's harnessing all of the forces that have given us all this stuff in the first place. So now we're getting to the top level stuff here. So the question is, how do you actually bring this about? I think the Republican brand is permanently tarnished. I think the word conservative is in many ways not indicative of the way that many of us think. Many of the things we do want to conserve, but much of what we talk about is liberating. It's pro-freedom. And so, needless to say, I think the term liberal and Democrat is tarnished. Liberals know the term liberal is tarnished. That's why they don't call themselves liberals. They call themselves progressives or moderates or whatever. No. What I want to do is I want to call something called the common sense resistance, because the only people that are going to argue against common sense are the elitists who think they're smarter than everybody else, and these are the people that get everybody into trouble. If you call it the common sense resistance, you are automatically selecting out the idiots that get you into trouble in the first place. So the common sense resistance is a brand, and the Republicans have the color red, and the Democrats have the color blue, and we have the color white, because white is simply not a statement. And what I'm talking about is actually several things. I'm talking about a virtual political party. What does that mean? A virtual political... I'm not talking about starting a third party. I'm trying to think as far outside of the box as I can here. I don't know if I believe in political parties anymore. I don't know if I believe in winning political battles anymore. But if you had a group of people who were connected through the internet who simply had the same general ambitions and goals to live better than their parents did, to earn a reward for their hard work, these fundamental things that just about everybody shares, then it's not a question of I'm going to join the conservatives or I'm going to join no. What happens then is, then the world breaks down into two different kinds of people. It breaks down into producers and it breaks down into parasites. And we're not even going to call them parasites because it's a pejorative term, but it breaks down into people who are problem solvers, and it breaks down into people who are problems. And so what we do is we don't ever threaten the political structure by any kind of protests. We certainly can have... Why would we have a rally? This all happens on the internet, you see. It's all virtual. And when you start getting into virtual arrangements, now you start getting into the actual serious genius. Not to say that what I'm saying is genius, but the genius of the idea. This came from this book, The Spider and the Starfish, I think. And I think the point they were making, and I'm mungling it, I need to go read it again. But basically what they said was, if you have a spider and you cut a leg off a spider, now you got a 7-leg spider. And if you cut another leg off, you got a 6-leg spider. If you cut off the head, they got a dead spider. But if you cut an arm off of a starfish, the starfish grows a new arm. And I think this is true. I think the arm also grows a new starfish. And so what you're talking about is you're talking about self-organizing structures. You're just laying out the very basics, but you're not putting a lot of structure down there because each individual one will be different. The American Academy in Des Moines, Iowa will look different than the American Academy in Louisiana because it's a different culture, but the same principles are there. One of the examples that they used in this book is, strangely enough, a 12-step program. And the example they use the 12-step program is, they said that when Bill W., happy coincidence, started Alcoholics Anonymous, other people saw the success rate that he had, and they said they wanted to duplicate it. And people around Bill said, well, that means, Bill, that you're going to have to copyright the name, copyright the 12-step themselves. You're going to have to copyright the book, and it also means you probably should trademark Alcoholics Anonymous, and then you can charge a licensing fee, and you'll be rich. And that way you'll have control over it, Bill, and you'll be able to have, you'll have to have officers, and they'll have to get a certain kind of training in order to administer this whole thing, this whole kind of top-down thing. And Bill W., who by all accounts was a pretty good guy, said, no, we're not going to do that. First of all, I'm going to give it to him for free. All we've got is this little handbook. It's just 12 steps and a couple of suggestions. And we're going to just give it to anybody who wants it. We're going to mail it to them. Well, how are you going to enforce that they're going to do the 12 steps the way that we do the 12 steps? And Bill W. said, we're not going to enforce it. If they can think of a better way to do it, then by God, send it back and we'll make it a 14-step program. You see the genius and the fundamental confidence and the fundamental insight and vision of what he did there? He didn't pretend to have all the answers at all, and he didn't have the ego investment in it either. He said, this is the best that I can make it. If people think this is good and helps them, then send it out to them. And if they can improve it, it's open source code. Thank you very much, X-Curl. That's exactly right. Apple doesn't make these apps. Apple makes a machine, and then it opens up the software. It opens up the code so that if you have an idea for an app, you can make one. That's why there's damn near 1 million apps for this thing. I bought this iPhone because, this is a quick aside, I bought this iPhone because of two apps. One of them's called Around Me, which tells me where the nearest restaurant is, gives me directions, the hours, and all the other stuff. But I bought the thing really because of Shazam. And Shazam is a real simple app. And I'll tell you why I bought the iPhone, because of Shazam. Shazam, if you don't know, is a program. It's a little app, and it's a little button you push on your screen. In fact, why not use a visual aid if you've got a visual aid? Here it is. That button right there, Shazam. The reason I bought the phone was I was in a crowded restaurant. Somebody had an iPhone and somebody had Shazam, and they pushed this button, and I was in a crowded Mexican restaurant, and there was a tune playing, and Shazam samples does its thing, the little bar goes, and then it goes ding, and Shazam showed me the name of the song, when it was recorded, who was in the band, and gave me a link so that I could buy that on iTunes. Now let me make the point here. I'm not a big music guy, so I didn't buy Shazam because I want to add to my music library. The reason I bought the iPhone was because the second that Shazam did what it did, the instant it got that iPhone, the instant it brought back the music and told me where to buy it, the instant it was finished, I knew exactly how it worked. The instant it was over, I said, okay, what did it do? It sampled the sound. It made a sound recording. It made an audio file of the sound recording. It then transmitted that sound file back to a central computer using the 3G on the phone. The computers then compared that sound file against all of the existing sound files in their music library, did a match, filtered out the noise, sent the results back to the phone, and then sent a link to how to buy it. The second I saw Shazam work, I knew exactly how Shazam worked, but the entire point of this example is I could not have thought of Shazam if I had sat under a blue sky for a million years. A million years, I never would have thought of it. So this is open source government. This is open source structure. The entire idea of the common sense resistance is not that Bill Whittle is dictating this plan. On the contrary, all I'm doing is saying if we had a critical mass of people, the best and brightest people are going to be attracted to this idea instantly. It's going to appeal to them instantly. And I can tell from the comment section, I know this is going to work. And so everybody brings their expertise in. Lawyers bring their expertise in. All this other people bring their expertise in. And I've seen this example happen once in real time. It happened back almost 8 years exactly to the day. Because about a week, or maybe it was 2-3 weeks prior to the 2004 election, CBS News said that George W. Bush was AWOL from the Texas Air National Guard, and they had a document to prove it, and they put that document on the show, and it was hurting Bush very badly. It was making George W. Bush look like a coward and a criminal, basically. He's AWOL. And so CBS News showed it on the TV show, but they made the simple mistake of putting it on the internet. I'm talking about how things self-assemble here. So what happened? They put it up on the internet. What happened then? A guy named Buck, I think it was Buckeye, who was a member of the Free Republic, a Freeper. It's just a bulletin board for conservatives. Took a look at that document, and within about 20 minutes of that document being posted by CBS as evidence of George Bush being a coward and a criminal, Buckhead looked at it, and it was, I'm inventing the number, I think it was George Bush was a member of the 165th Texas Air National Guard Wing, 165TH, right? And on the document, it said 165, and after that, little th, the little uppercase th. And Buckhead said, wait a minute. This is from 1968, right? You didn't have little th's in 1968. That's a word processor artifact. If this had been typed on a typewriter in 1968, it would have been 1968 or 165, and then full-size T and a full-size H. That smells a little funny. Now it goes to Charles Johnson, who used to be a hero and has gone completely mad, but Charles Johnson was a graphic designer. He saw Buckhead's post, and what Charles Johnson did was Charles Johnson took this document, which was purported to have been written in 1968 and was aged and mimeographed and looked like it was from the time and apparently had the right timestamp and everything. And Charles Johnson took the words from that document and typed it into Microsoft Word 2000, and he didn't change any of the default settings. He didn't do anything. He just typed it in and printed it out. And then he took that printed copy and overlaid it against this document that they claim was the evidence of George W. Bush being AWOL in 1968, and it was a perfect match. And he set up a GIF, a flashing two-image animation. Old one, new one, old one, new one, old one, new one. 1968, fresh out of the printer in Microsoft Word 2000. 100%, 100% match. Now here's where it gets really interesting. CBS counterattacks by saying, no, there were a few typewriters that could do the uppercase TH. You had to change the ball, and you had to pull out the ball on the selectric and then put the little ball in, and then you type in the TH and you pull the ball out, then you type the rest of the memo, which meant that you had to believe that a guy who's writing a memo ostensibly for himself to cover his own ass is sitting there going, look, I think George W. Bush may not show up here at the 165, excuse me one second, TH meeting on Friday. You had to believe that, first of all. But now it gets fascinating, because then what happened was they actually said, what they actually said was, no, I take that back. What they'd actually said was that there was, in fact, an IBM typesetting machine that could have produced the small uppercase TH, which cost like $7,000. And somebody said that's how it could have been done. And then a guy in the comments section I think it was at Little Green Footballs at Charles's blog. I'll never forget this moment as long as I live. I'll never forget it as long as I live. He said, no, the IBM Selectric, whatever the story was, he said, no, the IBM Selectric is not capable of doing that. And somebody said, well, how do you know? He said, I know because I was the chief engineer for the IBM Selectric. I worked at IBM for 25 years. I designed the IBM Selectric. Oh, okay, that's how you know. And so it was proven to be a fraud. It cost Dan Rather his career. George Bush went on to win the election. But the point that's so fascinating about that is who organized that? The CBS said the White House this is the result of the White House. The White House is sending out commands. Nobody sent out commands for anything. It just self-assembled. It wasn't there before. People brought their expertise to the problem, and then when the problem went away, the people went away. Gone, like that. So, what am I talking about? What I'm talking about is, if you're talking about a world that is a post-government world in the way that we understand government, something like the common sense resistance is just a brand name for the kind of thing that it is, but the actual structure looks like this. You as an individual American citizen would have to stop thinking of yourself as an employee of a company, and you would have to do what most actors do out here and writers do. You would have to consider yourself a free agent. You'd have to consider yourself a private contractor. And you would have to be comfortable with the idea, which is very disquieting for many people, but I've lived my entire life this way, and believe me, you get used to it. You would have to consider yourself a free agent just basically a free agent. And you would have to, private contractor is the word I'm looking for. And you would then have to plug yourself into these virtual networks that would arise and would want a service or a product. And so I, for example, can plug into any network that's looking to hire a writer, because I'm a good writer. I could also plug in to another network and get paid as a pilot. I'm not a commercial pilot, but if somebody wanted to go for a ride for $100, that's a commercial flight. But let's say I was a commercial pilot. I could plug in as a pilot. I could dig a ditch if I had to. I could grow crops if I had to. There are any number of ways to do this. And so you stop thinking of yourself as, what are you? I'm an engineer for Verizon. What are you really? What are you really? I'm really a guy with engineering experience who's currently working for Verizon, but I also know how to make duck decoys because I do that in my spare time, and I've gotten very good at that. And I also know how to milk a cow, and I also know how to, I have my commercial driver's license. I drove a truck for a while. Now, you're not just an engineer for Verizon, are you? Now you're a guy who is not a cog. Don't think of yourself as a cog, because you're much more important than that. You're a molecule. You're a molecule that has a certain protein code on its surface, and because of the protein code, which is your skill set, you can plug into any number of other molecules and get paid for them, and you can often do it simultaneously. So you might be a truck driver at nighttime, and you might be a writer in the daytime. Many people live this way already, but not many people are comfortable with the idea of the fact that it could be a much more fluid environment. And so the common sense resistance could become a series of networks that are utterly dispersed, and they're not controlled by anybody, especially not me. I'm barely smart enough to turn this computer on. I start the show, I've done 20 of them, and the first thing that happens is light fall over. I can barely dress myself. But what would happen is you would be able to create not a network, but you would be able to create a structure where the networks would create themselves. And then you start getting into the real gray area, because this is the one area where the government could come after you. But if we had legal minds on this problem, and if we had, and I think all problems are solvable. There could become a world where you are connected through the internet to any number of networks that are interested in your skill set. So let's say I'm an orthodontist, and let's say that I want an extension on the back of my house. Now, on the other hand, you're a contractor, and your kid needs braces, right? Now, I understand we're getting in some gray area with the government here, but just hear me out, and then we'll see how the problem will be solved. In a world without the government constantly getting on your case, you very easily could say, well, I charge $5,000 for braces. And this guy could say, I charge $5,000 to put a new guest room on the back of a house, whatever the numbers are, right? Now, you can't go to a barter economy. You can't just barter orthodontics for construction, because the numbers, you can't barter, I can't barter the ability to give a person a ride in an airplane for a brand new car. You have to have an exchange amount, and you don't have to stop using money, you see. But if you can get as much of the stuff as possible, that means you can live on less money. The less money you live on, the less money the state gets. But I'm not talking about going galt here. I'm not talking about collapsing the state. First of all, I don't want those lives on my hands. And secondly, there is no way to fight this government. If they decide they want you in jail, I hate to say it, that's the world we're facing now, right? So I'm about done. But what I am saying is this. If you're committed to not breaking the law, and this to me is the golden, fundamental, absolutely outstanding single precept, this is the one thing that will destroy this, is you never, ever break a law. You never, ever break a law. You pay full taxes or whatever on the transactions. You do all of that. But what the end result is, you get quality service for what you're paying for, and all of the dead weight is gone. You are paying 20, 30, 40, 50% of your income in taxes. Goodbye. It's gone. You just have to accept that, in my opinion. But you can then produce a society that does all of the things that our government is not doing, and by doing them well in parallel, very quickly, very, very quickly, people in their own self-interest, who have nothing to do with their politics, it's got nothing to do with how they identify, people will take their kids out of a public school that's not working and put it into a private school that is working. And people will move. And so this old corrupt structure has a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller base, a smaller population base, a smaller financial base, and you don't have to turn around the giant ship of the state or the giant union-controlled business of the LA Unified School District, and you don't fight them anymore. You don't waste any more time. You don't waste any more time or effort or money or soul or sweat on fighting these people. You just leave them alone. Leave them alone. What you're really doing, in order to close this pitch, my friends, what you're really doing is you're going to go west. We're all just going to go west together. Now, we can't all go west into an actual community. Maybe we could. Who knows? I don't know if there's a place where you can get away from these laws. Maybe we can all agree that it'd be fun to live in Des Moines or whatever the case may be. Yeah, I mentioned Des Moines again. Must be a great place. But I'm not really talking about that at all, because I think that's a death of the idea. Might be a nice byproduct of the idea, and maybe one of the outcomes of the idea is that people set up communities of like-minded people where we all can go live, and that's wonderful, swell. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about organizing on the internet to get things that you would not have been able to get through this corrupt and worthless and ever larger government. And I think anything I say beyond this point is weakening the sail rather than helping it. So I'll just close by saying this tonight. We get out of the politics game in terms of Barack Obama just won control. Barack Obama was just elected to be the captain of the Titanic. And when I say the Titanic, I know many people think America died tonight and the Republic's done. No. He has been given a chance to continue to be the captain of a gigantic state organization that has kept America from being America. And this boat is sinking. It's sinking under the weight of its own red ink, and nothing can save it now. And there are going to be consequences to that, and we have to prepare ourselves. That's another thing that these common sense resistance networks can be. They can be support and survival networks for what happens when this thing comes, because we don't know what's going to happen when we default on 16 trillion or 50 trillion or 100 trillion. We don't know. But what we do know is nobody. Hey, Curtis Johnson, if you're talking about me, the guy must be smoking some of that newly legalized Colorado weed. If you really believe that, and if that was directed to me, I don't wish you any harm. But if that's really directed to me, go someplace else, man. Just go someplace else. If that was directed at somebody else or somebody else politically, I just saw it come by in the comment section. You see what I mean? I don't have the patience. I don't have the patience to argue with people who are going to tell me why things can't happen anymore. I've just seen it happen. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about tonight. And I wanted those of you who are within the sound of my voice to tell you that I don't think that this is the end of America. I think it's the end of the state. It's going to get bigger before it goes away, and it's going to get more powerful. And my friends, don't kid yourself. Things are going to get much, 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 much worse before they get better. But as I explained to that person I told you about earlier, we don't get to be Churchill in broad daylight. None of us get to be Churchills in the sunshine. When Churchill or Lincoln or Washington rallied people and showed courage, you assume that they were always courageous, and courageous from birth and courageous every minute of their lives. But I'm here to tell you that I know in my heart that somebody like Winston Churchill, who my mom saw in the flesh as a young girl in England, standing on a pile of rubble, fat little man in a jumpsuit and a cigar, shaking his fist up at the Germans, holding up two fingers as the last of the bombers was flying away. You look at people like Winston Churchill and you think, my God, what courage that man had, what one of a kind, what an amazing guy, what amazing courage. But I assure you, I promise you, that the night before he stood on that rubble, that man sat in his room, in his bed, and cried his eyes out and said to his wife, I don't see how we're ever going to stop Hitler. I don't see how we can stop him. He's run all over Europe. He's unbeatable. He's unbeatable. Well, we can't stop him. He's going to conquer this island, and he's going to make us slaves, and he's going to kill us all, and we can't stop him. I know that Winston Churchill said that to his wife. I know it. I know he did. I know for a certain fact that Abraham Lincoln used to groan and cry and wail and thrash in his bed so much that the guards outside of his door, the two Union guards outside his door, used to sit there and sob to each other because the sounds of this man wrestling in his sleep were so appalling. He was in such agony of doubt and fear that he simply almost died in his sleep. And certainly no one has to tell you the story of George Washington, who through years and years and years of defeat and not just, and see, this is the thing that you really have to understand, folks, not just defeat at the hands of the British, because Washington could take that and most people could take being defeated by your enemies, but Washington had to face the fact that the goddamn Congress wouldn't even give him enough money to buy shoes for his own soldiers, that his Congress was out there dicking around about who's going to pay what when his men are dying in the snow of dysentery. So not only did he have to have the courage to face his enemies, he had the courage to face the fact that his friends weren't behind him either. And Washington goes out there and rides out there on a white horse and tells his men it's going to be okay. You think Washington is made out of marble, and so is Lincoln, and so is Churchill. You think these people are made out of marble, that they're just different than us, they're just born out of raw courage. It's not true. Those men went to bed that night and they sobbed their eyes out and they didn't know what they were going to do. They didn't know how they're going to face tomorrow. They had no clue at all. None. And that's the situation you're in tonight, the same situation I'm in tonight too. So courage is a choice, and it's a choice we're going to make. We're going to make that choice right now. I am not going to let these bastards steal this country. They can steal the government, but they're not stealing this country. They're not stealing this idea. And we are going to whip these people out of their boots. And I thought I meant we were going to beat them in an election. I was so stupid I couldn't even see how wrong I was. When we're finished with these people, they're going to realize that they inherited the last ticket on the Titanic. They're going to realize that they are the biggest, giantest largest dinosaur on the face of the earth. They are going to stand there as T-Rex, clouded in their glory, just like Obama is tonight, and they're going to look up in the sky, and they're going to see that bright flash of light, which is the asteroid that is coming to make them all extinct. They have inherited ashes, these people. When we are finished with them, they are not going to recognize this government because it's not even going to be a government. It is going to be something newer and better adopted to a society that is no longer a top-down industrial-based command and control government. We're all free agents. We're all free people. We're going to form our own networks and make our own jobs. We're going to get the things we want out of life because we deserve them. We're not going to take anything for free. And anybody who comes into this network who wants something for free will not be punished. They're not going to be tried. They're not going to be convicted. Nothing. We just won't do business with them. They will not be able to enter the network because they will have nothing of value to provide the network. It's just that simple. And we're never going to break a law. Ever. The government's never going to put me in jail because I'm not leading a revolution against this government. I am a loyal, tax-paying American. I do my duty. I go vote. I do jury duty. I'm not stocking up ammunition. I am not launching a resistance. I'm not talking about gunfire. I'm not talking about overthrowing the government. On the contrary, how much taxes do I owe you? Here's your check. Thank you very much. I am simply now going to pay $9.95 a month to go out there and have my space program and put some boots on the moon. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. And don't give up. Don't give up. Think differently. I'm talking on an Apple computer. Think differently. Tonight was the night that freed America. It's not the night that America died. Tonight was the night that freed America for the virtuous half of this country who have come to realize that there has got to be a better way than this. We're not going to waste any more time with these political fights with people who fight this dirty. We're not going to play their game anymore. We're not going to play their game anymore. We are going to create our own game and our own ball on our own field. And this is just a warm-up. I'm going to put all of this stuff out here, and I'm going to put it in a lot more organized form, and I'm going to make this case in a very logical and steadfast way. And my only hope, and I have a 100% conviction that this is going to happen, is that I'm going to simply kick this little boat out onto the ocean, and then the wind is going to take it places that I cannot imagine. And you're going to be the wind. That's what we're going to do. Be happy. And if you can't be happy, act happy. Because people are depending on you tonight. Other people are depending on you. So go out there and be Churchill. Don't be a whiny crybaby. They beat us. We lost. Did they cheat? Of course they cheated. Did they have the media at their back? Is that another 20 points of cheating? You're damn right it is. Can we do anything about it? Not directly. We can build a parallel media. It's going to take us a while, but we'll do it. We'll do it. We don't waste another effort looking back. We never waste another second of our time arguing with these people. We don't give a damn about what they have to say. They can say we're nuts. They can say it's loony. They can say it's crazy. Whatever say they want to. We're not going to waste any more time arguing with these losers. We are simply going to go out and build ourselves a future that we deserve to live in. You all have a good night. God bless America, and we'll see you soon.